Chapter 12. I gotta quit doing these late at night because I'm always yawning. Not a great host. Anyhow, chapter 12. Grant Kimbrough had made his decision. The party was doomed, and he did not intend to be a part of that doomed party. For several nights he had been studying a route among the rocks, and he had decided it allowed a safe passage, relatively free of observation, and one over which no sound would be made because of the sand. Webb could get the horses saddled, and when all was quiet during their march, they would mount up and slip out. Give them a few miles start, and no Indian pony was going to catch his thoroughbred. They could make it north and then west, and they were sure to reach Yuma. On the river as it was, there was no way they would miss, for the Colorado made a moat across the whole west border of Arizona. Let Logan Cate play his game of sitting tight. He could have it. They would die here of starvation, if not of Indian arrows or bullets. Nobody would come. Nobody knew where they were. Zimmerman wanted to come, and Zimmerman had some idea of his own. All right, let him. 3 targets were better than 2, and Zimmerman was a big man. In the darkness, he was sure to attract most of the gunfire, if there was any, and Kimbrough was sure there would be none. He walked to where Jennifer was roasting some strips of mutton, then brushed a wisp of her hair back from her face and smiled at him. She had changed in some way he could not define. She seemed more mature, more sure of herself. It was a change that disturbed him. Why, he could not have said. "No job for you," he said. "Somebody has to do it, and Junie does more than her share," said Jennifer. "We'll be out of it soon," said Kimbrough. She glanced at him. "I'm glad to hear you say so. I thought you were beginning to think like the others, the ones who believe we'll never get out." "They may not, but you will." Her eyes searched his face. "What do you mean by that?" "That I'm taking care of you, Jen, as I promised I would. I am going to see that you get out of here." Her eyes softened, and she put her hand on his sleeve. "Of course, Grant. I never doubted that you were thinking of me." "Get some rest," he said. "You'll need it." He walked away, and she saw him go to his horse. He had been rustling extra feed for the thoroughbred these past 2 days, bringing it to the horse and picking his hat full of mesquite beans as he lay in the brush. She made coffee, and one by one they came to the fire to eat. Grant was in the best mood she had seen him since their arrival, and she was pleased. Yet when she glanced at Cate's, she was vaguely uneasy. Night was drawing near, and the first shadows were creeping out from the rocks, gathering in the hollow spaces, pointing long fingers from the cacti and the ocotillo. But it was a haunted evening. Each in his or her own way was feeling the sudden apprehension, and the Indians who had before seemed closed out now seemed desperately near. The burning of the brush walling the corral had opened a way into their fortress, had deprived them of at least a third of the remaining water, and had left them feeling exposed to the dangers of the creeping night. Nobody talked, and yet nobody slept. All were restless, silent, alert for danger. Fear was a living thing among them. Webb mopped his slack-jawed face with a nervous hand. Taylor's tough assurance was no longer stolid. He moved quickly at the slightest sound, on edge and jittery. Even Jim Beaupre was feeling it. He moved from place to place, studying the desert, eager for a shot at something. Only Tony Lugo seemed the same, and even the Pima was alert. His eyes, which were quiet as a rule, now seemed larger. They avoided each other's eyes, each haunted by a knowledge they could no longer avoid, that death was near. That before another day was gone, some of them here might not be alive. The burning of the brush had indicated a change. for it was something the Apaches might have done at any time. If they had not done it until now, there had to be a reason. Grant Kimbrough felt relieved. The very fact that he had made a decision was a relief, and he had no doubt of success. Sure, they were taking a chance, but nothing was going to happen to him, and flight was the only way out now. He would get Jennifer out of this, and they could be married in Yuma. However, and the thought came to him suddenly, it might not be wise to leave Arizona just yet. If Jim Fair had tried to follow them, he might now be dead, killed by the very Indians who lay out there on the rocks. And if that had happened, Jennifer might now own all those vast acres and cattle. Yes, it would be wise to marry Jennifer as soon as they reached Yuma. This guy's mind's working all the time. The plans he had evolved were few and simple. He was soldier enough to know the more complicated the plan, the less chance of it working. The horses were close to them. There was a way out into the boulders. Webb, Zimmerman, and he would manage to get their horses to that side under cover of darkness. They would rise out and escape. It might be hours before the others realized they were gone. If he considered the fact that they would have leave the rocks, considered the fact that they would leave the rocks unguarded, it was not for long. In this world, one did what was best for one, and what happened to the others could not be helped. Logan Cate, rolling his smoke near the coals of the fire, considered the situation that faced him. Actually, they were better situated for defense now than before. As their lines were tighter, they had almost no food for the horses, and the water was low. There were but 8 horses to mount 12 people, and knowing the desert that lay ahead of them, Cates knew that at least one horse must be used to pack water. Otherwise, they would never make it out at all. He returned to his thoughts of attacking the Apaches. It had remained in the back of his mind ever since they had been cornered here. But the time must be carefully chosen, and now he was sure it was the time. At first, the Indians would have been too wary, too careful, yet now they would be sure of themselves. They would have settled into a routine, and they would not be expecting the whites to attack. Too large a party would make too much noise. It might be best if he did it alone, yet such an attack would be less effective. He decided finally that it must be 3 or 4 men. The selection of Lugo for one of them was immediate. He would be the best of them all on such an attack, and he would refuse to be left behind anyway. Lonnie would want to go, the remaining man must be one of the others. He considered Kimbrough, then passed him over. The man had been a horse soldier, no doubt brave enough, but not a man to crawl on his belly in the sand or lie still for what might be hours. Sheehan must be left behind because if anything happened while they were gone, he was the man to handle it. He wanted no part of Zimmerman or Webb, for he had faith in neither man. It boiled down to Taylor or Beaupre. When the sun had gone, the evening turned the desert into an enchanted place. A soft wind cooled the sands and took away the last of the heat. But it was a wind that just stirred the leaves and was not bold enough to brush branches aside or lift dust. Somewhere far out over the sand, a quail called, and the mountains in the west, abandoned by the sun, grew dark with shadow, and only the eastern ridges were bright. Taylor brought fuel to the fire and built it brighter, and Cate strolled to where Lugo sat watching the desert. He squatted on his heels beside the Pima. 3-4 hours from now, he said, a few of us are going to hit the Apache where it hurts. I come, Lugo said. It is time. Cates remained talking quietly with the Pima, telling him what he planned, anxious to get the Indians' reactions. The man was a fighter, and he knew the Apache. He would know if the plan was a wise one. But Lugo had no protests. He accepted the suggested route and had only a few comments to make on the probable placing of Apache sentries. Lonnie was next. The boy was talking to Junie, who was working over the fire. But when she left for a few minutes, Cate explained his purpose. He poked at the fire a bit, then lifted a burning stick to light his cigarette, talking around the cigarette. "You, Lugo, and me," he said. "I think one more man. You are doing it. You're going to hit their camp and get a couple of horses if we can, maybe 4 or 5. That'll be tough. Most of all, I want to slow them down, make them sick of their job. By now, they think we're whipped." "All right, whenever you're ready." "At 11, then." In the last minutes of daylight, a sudden smashing volley hit the camp. A bullet knocked the old pot off the fire. Another scattered coals. Lonnie hit the ground hard and fired at the brush beyond the margin, and everyone scattered for shelter and firing positions. For a few minutes, the fire came thick and fast. One of the horses screamed and reared, but miraculously it was only a burn. Beaupre rolled into shelter behind a rock, then scrambled up and raced for a better firing position, and as suddenly the attack was over. The cooking pot was gone. One of the horses had been creased on the shoulder, and Lonnie had the top of his ear burned. Yet they were badly shaken. It seemed unreasonable that the Indians could have been so close and no more serious injuries were sustained. "Maybe they want us alive," Beaupre said. Taylor lifted his head slowly and peered at Beaupre. "That's fool talk. Why would they want us alive?" "We've women here," Beaupre said grimly, "and an Apache can have a sight of fun with a living prisoner." Taylor's features seemed to alter. His grimness left him, and some of his certainty. He looked from Jim Beaupre to Cates. "They'd never do a thing like that," he said. "Why, that's crazy." Yet it was apparent he believed they would. Every person in the Southwest had heard stories of what an Apache could do with a living prisoner, and for the first time Taylor seemed to consider that possibility. He lowered his eyes and began trailing sand through his fingers. Nobody else said anything. Junie worked on Lonnie Foreman's ear, and Beaupre ran a ramrod through his rifle. The fire had burned low. Lugo was rubbing grease in the bullet burn on the horse. And several minutes passed without comment. Kimbrough was thinking of San Francisco. Once away from here, he'd never come back. If Fair was dead and the ranch was theirs, they'd sell out and go back east. This was no country for a sensible man. The stars came out. The night wind stilled. Somewhere a coyote called. The faint glow from the coals showed on Beaupre's seamed face and glinted from the rifle barrel as he worked. One of the horses stamped and blew, leaning his head back against a rock. Sergeant Sheehan sang, "They're tinting tonight" on the old campground, in a fair Irish tenor. The mournful sound of the song lifted above the little circle among the rocks, and as he sang, Jennifer put sticks on the coals and a little flame began to rise. The firelight played on their faces, and when the song died, there was silence. Well, that was chapter 12. Love you, God bless.